kind of religious site before that, even.
Ah.
So it's very, very old.
Yeah, I actually, when I lived in Brussels, I thought that was pretty old. You know, there was a tram line that ran around the city, and it followed the route of the ancient wall around the city of Brussels.
That's awesome.
Bruxelles, I guess,
Yeah, depending on which language you
or
want to go with.
Brussels if you're Flemish.
All right, well, since it looks like it's time, we'll go ahead and get started. So I'm Stacy from the Iowa City Public Library, and I'm delighted that we have a guest speaker with us today. This is Tyler Drigg, who is an online library school student from the University of Washington in Seattle. He currently lives in Aachen, Germany, with his wife and newborn daughter. And before moving to Germany, Tyler worked at the Iowa City Public Library with us for several years, first as a page and later as a library assistant. So it's been a treat to be able to work with Tyler again in this capacity. So I'll hand it over.
Yeah, I just want to say it's also been a treat to work with you, Stacy. And before we get started, I just want to thank ICPL for letting me put this on, and Stacy in particular for shepherding me through this whole process. And I also want to thank all of you for being here today to listen to my presentation. Today, we're going to talk about cookies. And so I'm going to try to get on here and figure out how to do the share screen again so you guys can see my presentation and not just have to listen to me talk the whole time, as fun as that might be. So it should work now that you can see my presentation here. It's entitled Cookies 101, and we're going to be discussing what web cookies are, the process of how websites use your information when you go online, and what you can do to kind of protect your data in that process. As you can see, I've got some cookies right here. Unfortunately, we're not going to be talking as much about these kind of cookies, although I have some fun cookie images sprinkled throughout the presentation. So apologies if that makes you hungry. So again, just to recap kind of the goals of the presentation, I want to provide kind of a broad overview of how websites use your information when you go online. You know, what is a cookie? Specifically, I want to talk about social media and large tech companies, how kind of big tech or big data uses your information, because especially in the realm of cookies, they kind of guide a lot of online traffic. And then, as I discussed earlier, we'll be hitting on some tips for what you can do to be better protected online and make sure you're sharing your information in the way that you want to be sharing it and make some more informed choices. So again, what are cookies? So you might hear this word a lot in the information in the context of the internet, but what is a cookie actually? And so cookie is a small web file that websites send to your computers. They live on your computer, and then your computer and the websites talk back and forth. And so these small text files live on your computer. So I actually have on my computer a place where your cookies kind of live. And so you can see, just to kind of give you a sense of what a cookie actually looks like, you can see there are these really small little nonsense short text files. And so if I scroll down here, you can see some other ones. You know, you can see little kind of bits of text that might be pulled out from a website, but to us, it doesn't look like anything. But to your computer, as a machine readable kind of file, it means something.
So Tyler, we're still seeing PowerPoint for you. If
you are?
If you do
okay.
Stop share, you can choose the other window.
Okay, sure. I'll do a new share.
Yeah.
And then we have this. Okay. Sorry about that. So now are you seeing this notepad file?
Yeah, that's great.
Okay, yeah. So as I said, some of it looks like gibberish, right? And then you can see some of it is actual text. And so, yeah, as to us, it doesn't mean anything, but it's a machine readable document that your computer and websites use to talk to each other. And so now we'll go back to the presentation since we have that idea in our mind. And so they use these, like I said, they use these small text files to talk to each other. But how do they actually use these files? What do they do? They don't eat them like Pac-Man, unfortunately, but they use them mainly in three main ways, which we'll cover in this presentation. So the first is functional cookies. So these files are used by websites to actually make the website work. So these are things like making sure you're logged in, if you're doing online shopping, what's in your cart. Hi, Stacy.
So we're still seeing your cookies.
Oh gosh,
By the way.
no. Okay, so let's do new share again and go here. Thanks for bearing with me, everybody. So resume slideshow. All right, are we back on the slideshow now? Yes, okay, thank you. All right, so again, like I said, functional cookies are kind of the foundational cookies that websites will use. Making sure the websites actually work, remembering you're logged in, what's in your cart. So if you're familiar with Amazon, you might remember the cart icon. Down here below that, we have kind of the Google Suite icons, which you might use if you're familiar with Gmail. So if you navigate away from your email and then navigate back, it remembers that you're logged in. You don't have to log in again. That's pretty convenient. And then like if you're going to a website like here, we have a Holiday Inn. They might use it to remember your login details for internet security purposes, and just kind of generally make sure you can navigate around the website. So that's one category of cookies that websites use, is functional cookies. The second type that websites also use are statistical cookies. So this is used more to measure the website performance. Companies might be interested in how long you're spending on their site, which parts of the site you're using. So for instance, if you're on a news website and you're clicking over to an article, websites might want to track that. And then other kinds of information like that to measure website performance and analyze how users are interacting with their website. So like I said, these types of cookies can be used to analyze website performance, but they can also track user behavior, and we'll come back to that later in the presentation. So the third type of cookies are cookies for personalization. And so these are the most tied to you specifically and are used to kind of curate your experience with the website and deliver content that the website thinks you might be interested in based on your previous behavior, and especially to target ads. So they might know you clicked on this article, you clicked on this product, this is something you bought, this is something you read, and so this is something else here you might be interested in. And so here again, we have an example from Amazon, which you might be familiar with if you do a lot of online shopping, where you might give a site some cookies if you're looking for this book, giving a mouse cookie, and then it would give you, based on that item, some other children's literature that you might or might not be interested in. And so that's an example of cookies as well. Is websites tracking your information over time and using that to guide you to other content. So again, just to recap, we have kind of two broad categories of cookies. So we have the functional and statistical type, which are more used for a specific website to track how that website is working, make sure you're logged in, analyze the website performance. And then on the other hand, we have kind of personalized or targeted cookies, where you might get an ad pop up for Girl Scout cookies or something else, depending on what you're browsing for. So just kind of keep in mind you have these 3 different types of cookies that are different. You have the functional and statistical kind, and then you have the more personalized targeted cookie usage. All right. So we have those 3 categories of cookies, the functional, the statistical, and the personalized. But another important category to keep in mind when we're talking about cookies is that cookies can exist as first-party cookies or third-party cookies. And so what that means is who created the cookie? Who created this little web file that lives on your computer? First-party cookies are used by the sites that created them, and they tend towards those more structural elements, the functional cookies, sometimes the statistical cookies as well. And so those are the cookies that websites use to make sure their websites work, right? To make sure that you can log into their website and not have to log in continuously, to make sure you can navigate around to different parts of the website, things like that. And then the third-party cookies are created by separate entities and are used for web analytics, personalization, and tracking. So these are more used for those targeted type of cookies. And websites might integrate third-party cookies on their website as revenue. Websites gain a lot of revenue from advertising, and they might also do it to enable a different kind of functionality. For example, a lot of third-party cookies are related to commenting or sharing links, things like that. And we'll talk about that a little bit more as time goes on. So just keep that in mind, that in addition to these 3 categories of cookies, the functional, the statistical, and the personalized, there's also these first-party cookies that are created by websites for use on their own sites, and third-party cookies that might come from somewhere else. So we've talked a lot about these big categories of cookies, right? But how do cookies actually track you? How do they actually work? One way that they might do this is through your browser information. When you connect to the internet, you have an address that's linked to your particular internet connection, and that's called your internet protocol or IP address. And most cookie files, when they're interfacing between you and your computer and the website, they'll link your web activity to this IP address. And cookies and websites will then use that to build this more personalized profile of you that they can use to track you. And then they can also pull information just from your browser itself and tell a lot of information about you that way, independent of whatever cookie, whatever web activity you're doing. And so I have a couple links here that kind of cover what your browser shares about you to the World Wide Web. And so if you are interested in learning more about this, you can write these down and take some time to test this on your own browser. So I'll give you a minute or a little bit to do that. And then I have these open on my own computer. And so hopefully I can do the screen share and kind of look at that, and we'll take some time and talk over this. So for now, just take some time and copy down these links if you're interested in that, or just take a break and drink some water. And then in a minute or so, we'll come back and touch base.
And if you don't happen to have paper or pencil handy, I can include these in the follow-up email that you'll get after the class today. So either way is good.
Yeah, absolutely.
Actually, I got a question.
Yeah, of
Or
course.
or a comment actually. If something tracks how long I spend on a particular part of a site, on a particular page, how does it
Mhm.
know the difference between, gee, this is really interesting, and what the hell is going on? I can't figure this out.
Right. Some cookies can kind of track if you're using your mouse to navigate around the page. So if you're scrolling up and down, and they can use that to kind of see like, oh, he's reading this, he's interested in this information. Um, some cookies can also use your browser information to see if you have a particular window open or if you decided, hey, this is kind of confusing, I'm gonna click away from this and look at something else for a while. Um, so they can kind of get a lot of information about how you're interacting with a thing, even beyond the fact that you opened it in terms of your mouse activity, if you're scrolling up and down, if you're touching your keyboard, um, things like that. All right. So just to kind of give you a sense of what kind of information these can pull in case you haven't had a chance to bring that up on your own, I'm going to share um, my web browser with you guys, and we can look at these links and kind of see what's going on with them. So let's see, I'm going to try to navigate away from my email and get to a different, all right, resume share. Yeah, here we go. All right. Hide video panel, there we go. Yep, all right. So here we go. Right. So here's kind of this is the second link that I had. And so this will kind of evaluate your browser in terms of if is it blocking these ads? Is it blocking trackers that don't need your consent to track you? Because some sites don't necessarily need or some cookies don't need your permission to collect information about you. And so for me on my browser, I have a privacy plugin enabled, and so it's doing a good job of protecting my information. But depending on your specific settings, that might not be the case. And then for this particular site, it kind of gives you some detailed results if you're interested in that. And so I encourage you, if you are interested in learning some more about your online privacy, this is a good resource. And this is also a good organization, the Electronic Frontier Foundation. They do a lot of advocacy for online privacy. And so that's a good resource if you're interested in learning more about this. But this is the first link that I had shared on that slide. And I think this is really interesting because it breaks down a few different categories of information that your browser collects about you. And so one of these might be location. Again, I have my privacy plugin enabled, so it's not collecting any location data about me, but it might for you, depending on what your settings are. But it can tell what kind of computer I have, what kind of browser I'm using, which is pretty interesting. And then again, it can get a lot of technical details. And this is interesting for websites to know in terms of their performance, but can also be helpful for targeted advertisers as well. Again, here's this IP address that we had talked about earlier. And it also knows how fast my connection is, which is also interesting for vendors or third-party cookies to know. It can tell if I'm logged into any particular social media website. This has to do with malware, which we'll talk about a little bit later, but kind of malicious, potentially malicious use of your data, which privacy plugins help to prevent. But this is what I think is really interesting, this kind of gyroscope stuff. It knows my device is probably laying on a table. It is in fact on a desk. But if it was, up in the air on my lap, something somewhere else, if I was on a mobile device, it would know that as well, which is kind of interesting. And then in terms of other stuff, it knows in the hardware, I think it also knows, yes, it's in the hardware, if my computer's plugged in and how charged my battery is. So your browser can tell a lot of information about you just from you going online, which I think is really helpful information to have. And this kind of brings that stuff we were talking about earlier into some more concrete terms for you guys. So hopefully that's not too overwhelming. And we'll go back to the presentation now. All right. So Stacy, just let me know if you can see the presentation again now.
Yep.
Okay, great. I did it right. All right. So we talked about some of the information that cookies are tracking. And here's some of the other kind of categories that they might use. And so like we talked about from the browser data, your location is something that cookies are interested in using for targeted content. And so this is something that's transmitted over your browser. And if you're using your phone, a lot of apps or other content that people use their phones for these days likes to have location data, like Google Maps, for instance. And then like Jerry was asking about, and I was explaining, like click or key tracking is one type of data that cookies can collect to gauge your interest or engagement with a particular content. And so yeah, some files can track the number of clicks you do, the keystrokes you do, if you're scrolling up or down on a page. And so then they can combine this with other cookies or session info, which is how long you're spending on a site before you click it away and close that window. And so they can use this to recreate your session, analyze your visit, kind of see what you were doing on their website. And then depending on the connection, like we looked at in that browser information page, this can be vulnerable to malicious use. Like if it's tracking your clicks or tracking your keystrokes, this is how a lot of people can get their passwords stolen, for instance. So that's something we want to guard against for sure. And then other types of things that are enabled by cookies in terms of internet security are Captchas, which are these goofy little text boxes that everybody might be familiar with. Some newer versions of this are also like those things that pop up that are images and that ask you to click all the street lights, to click all the crosswalks, bicycles, things like that. And so these are just ways for websites to know that you're not a robot, that you're a real person. And obviously that's important for internet security and for companies to actually know that actual people are engaging with their content. So it protects businesses and consumers. And there's a few kind of third-party entities that create this type of service. And one of the most popular ones has been owned by Google for about a decade now, a little bit more than that, just for your general information. All right, going back there. All right, so I wanted to talk about the difference between cookies and personally identifiable information. So like we talked about, some cookies are more interested in the actual functioning and structural integrity of the website, right? They want to make sure that you stay logged in, that the things that are in your cart stay in your cart. And so some things like that, like your username, your password, your account profile information, like your email address, or if it's a site that has a commercial nature, your billing address. These things are personally identifiable information that that are tracked via cookies. Because these are all things you would enter in, and the website would want to know that you had entered, so you didn't have to enter it a million times. So again, kind of what's the difference between personally identifiable information and cookies? So a lot of that browser information, that kind of hardware data that websites would care about for their performance, care more about your computer and don't care about your personal information as much. If a website needs to have Flash enabled or whatever, it doesn't need to know your birth date for that information or anything. But like we talked about, for anything where you log in and it's sharing personal information with you, like a banking website, for instance, or other kind of secure data that they want to make sure is to you personally, that's going to be a cookie transaction with the login information, because if the website wants to keep you logged in so you don't have to resubmit that information a million times, and it's just more secure that way for you, so you don't have to log in a million times. And so that's kind of an important distinction to understand, is that a lot of cookies work with personally identifiable information, but not all of them. Those kind of functional cookies don't necessarily care about that, and although some of them do, and the statistical cookies aren't really concerned with your personal identifiable information as much. All right, so getting to social media. So Facebook, Amazon, Twitter, and then big tech companies like Google, these control a lot of web traffic, both in terms of original web traffic to those sites themselves. If you're searching something on Google, if you're looking for something to buy on Amazon, if you're logging into Facebook. But they also have a lot of plugins that they use to encourage other websites to use their services. Again, this is stuff like Google Maps or Google Locations, links to Amazon or other product sites, comments or sharing links on Facebook. These are all kind of things that these big companies can use to put pressure on smaller companies and websites to integrate their kind of tracking cookies on their websites. And so what does this actually look like on a website? This looks like embedded information. So anything with like a like button or a heart, anything to share a link, and then anything that kind of wants you to log in. So here I kind of have a couple things. This first image is from a news website, so you could share the article, for instance, on Facebook or Twitter, or email it to somebody. Perhaps it'll be via Gmail or another service. Below that is kind of an example of cookie use from Twitter. And this might exist on other platforms as well. So that's kind of a use of cookies that websites might use to track your engagement with that information. And then to the right is a comment section. This one's from 538, but there are many comment sections like this. And so what's interesting about this one, I didn't link any of the commenters in this image because I kind of want to protect people's privacy. But comment sections like this on 538, for instance, work directly with your Facebook profile. So that's a good example of kind of an embedded information that's using on a website that's using these kind of larger services. All right. So what do these big companies like Facebook or Google, what do they do with your cookies once they have them? Like, why do they want these other websites to embed these services on their websites? So part of the reason is to analyze user activity and to be able to direct more targeted advertising. If you're engaging with content on other websites, sharing articles, things like that, these big tech companies would potentially like that information, so they could direct other content your way or know that you're interested in particular topics, so they could advertise that to you. And then the other part is then, because these companies have so much web traffic, other companies will pay for user profiles or kind of identity, not your specific identity, but they might be interested in advertising, for example, to middle-aged white people who drive trucks in the Midwest, for example. And so then they could, using the cookies that you have aggregated through your web activity, build kind of a audience for products that are like that, test that out, and then see if those products would be of interest to people with similar profiles that have visited their sites. So it's, again, for kind of analyzing usage for their own purposes, that first party nature, but then also simply having that information is of big interest to advertising companies and other web companies, so that they can have information with which to make advertising or service decisions. All right. So again, kind of expanding on this a little bit more, is there a difference between how big tech companies use cookies versus how other websites use cookies? Like we talked about at the beginning, a lot of websites use third-party cookies to personalize and curate content. It's interesting, like for a news website like Slate or the New York Times, or Wall Street Journal, or Iowa City Press Citizen, if you're reading an article on a particular topic, they might want to direct your attention to other articles on a similar kind of topic, right? Or other articles by the same author. But part of the difference for Facebook and Google is that they have such a significant advantage in platform that a lot of people visit Facebook or Google or websites that integrate their services, and so they can have a really big impact on the kind of content that people see, because they have a lot of information on individual users and are able to drive very specifically curated and targeted content. And then again, kind of reiterating an earlier point, a lot of third-party vendors and services that other websites use, like reCAPTCHA or DoubleClick, which is another kind of structural statistical targeting cookie company, are owned by Google or Amazon or other big tech companies like this. And then those companies are able to use that information for their own purposes. It's a big advantage and information for those large companies to have. And then again, just to drive home this point a little bit more, when we're talking about how much web traffic these big tech companies are controlling, in concrete numbers, what are we actually talking about? And so the Electronic Frontier Foundation, which is a online privacy watchdog organization, a nonprofit organization, a couple years ago in 2019, they compiled this report called Behind a One-Way Mirror, where they took a big in-depth dive into cookie usage. And in that report, you can kind of see how much web traffic is tracked by a particular company. And so as you can see, Google has a huge share, about 80%. Facebook is about 30%. Amazon is also a significant portion. And then we also have large companies like Twitter, Microsoft, Adobe, Yandex, which is, if I remember correctly, a Chinese online data company. So a lot of those companies are between 5 and 10%, but the really big ones like Google, Facebook, and Amazon are a huge proportion of the web traffic that people do or encounter on a day-to-day basis. Just so you kind of have a glimpse of the concrete numbers that we're talking about here. So obviously that's a little bit grim and scary, or can be potentially, to see how much web traffic is controlled by a few companies. And so if you want to exercise a little bit more control over your data, what's a good way to do that? And so part of that can come down to which browser you use. Chrome is a pretty popular browser that's owned by Google. And so that's part of why they are able to track so much online data, is because a lot of people use their web browser and a lot of people use their search engine. And so Chrome historically, because Google owns a lot of these third-party companies that offer these kind of cookie services, it hasn't limited third-party tracking methods as much as some of these other browsers like Safari or Firefox. Microsoft Edge is another one there that people might be aware of. Historically, Google Chrome hasn't limited third-party cookies as much as some of these others. Although, again, in the last couple years, that has changed a little bit, or is changing. Moving forward, Google has committed to using a different type of online tracking software that isn't a third-party cookie, called Flocks, which is kind of a local file that recreates a lot of this browser information that we talked about, and then aggregates that with similar users who visit similar websites before sending it off to Google or other companies. So the advantage for Google in terms of privacy there is that it's much less likely that they or third-party entities that they give your information to will be able to specifically identify you based on flocks, since you'll already kind of be one of many people with this information. And so Google's making some advancements in that field, but still other browsers like Firefox in particular have historically been better in terms of their default settings against third parties. So that's one option that you have if you want to limit your data collection, is use a different browser. Within your browser specifically, you can also enable do not track settings, which can stop some companies from collecting your information, because these third-party cookies can track you across like multiple websites quite often. Or based on your activity on one website, will show you targeted ads on another website, for instance. And so these do not track settings are designed to stop that from happening. And another kind of browser setting you can disable to limit the amount of information that cookies collect is autofill, which is like on Amazon, for instance, or other websites where you have to fill in your name, your address, et cetera, et cetera. If you turn that off, then cookies won't collect that information. And that's a way you can prevent sharing your data. A little less convenient, but it doesn't take that long to fill in for most people. And then also regular clearing your cookies can be a good way to keep you from sharing some data. Since then when you clear your cookie cache, you don't have those files on your computer that talk to the websites anymore, and they have to resend those and rebuild your profile. Okay, so that all sounds good, but how do you actually change your browser settings? What do you do to actually do that? So for Chrome, which is still actually the browser that I use, this can be changed by using the drop-down menu on the right-hand side and then clicking on Settings. And then cookie and site security can be cleared or reviewed under Privacy and Security. If you also go into History, that's a place where you can clear your cookies. So I can go back to my browser and we can look at that just so you kind of know where that's at, if that would be helpful. So I'll jump over to there and to show you guys where this is at. So again, to get to your settings, you want to go to these three little dots over here in the corner on Chrome. On different browsers, it will likely be different. And so then you go down here to History. You can click on that, and then it'll bring you to this page. And you want to click on this Clear Browsing Data, which will bring you over to Settings. And then it'll ask you how often you want to clear this. And so you can have a lot of control over how often you want to do this or how long you want to clear. So you can make the decision that feels right for you. And so then this is kind of more advanced things where you can get more control over which specific areas you're clearing, if that sounds interesting to you. All right. And so now we'll go back to the presentation. All right. So all the stuff we've talked about so far has mostly had to do with your computer or your laptop. But on your phone, clearing this might be a little bit different. And so one thing that you can do to prevent data collection on your phone is limiting permissions for apps. A lot of apps will want your location data to be more functional, but you don't necessarily have to give that information to them. They also might want kind of these statistical uses in terms of how often you use the app, what you do in the app, blah, blah, blah. And so you can go in your phone settings and decide there which permissions you give to which apps. And then your phone browser, on an iPhone, that would be Safari. On a Samsung or another phone, it might be different. But you can go within Safari or whichever web browser is on your phone and then clear your data there. It will look, at least in Safari, it looks like a little book. So that's kind of how you do that on your phone. I realized that was kind of a lot to talk through in the last couple minutes. But thankfully, this will be recorded and you can kind of go back and look at this later if you need a refresher, or ICPL has some like tech help hours. And if you want somebody to will help you walk through that, then the tech people at ICPL are really good and will definitely help you out. Another option that you have besides clearing your cookies and managing which data you share with your browser are something called a browser extension. These also might be called plugins based on which browser you're using. And there's a lot of browsers that are out there that are designed to protect your online privacy. The one that I use is called Privacy Badger. And I like that because it does kind of automatically do these do not track settings. It'll kind of enable that automatically on whichever website you go to, so you don't have to do it manually. But there are a lot of other popular extensions that you can use based on your preference. Adblocker Plus is a really popular one that will prevent you from seeing a lot of targeted advertising. And then NoScript is another one. That's a good choice to block third-party cookies. So you've got a lot of choice out there.
And Tyler,
yes.
Browser extensions are generally free, right?
Yeah. These ones, Privacy Badger is free. As far as I know, Adblocker Plus and NoScript are also free. Generally speaking, yeah, they are free, although like phone apps or other kind of things, there might be some paid versions that are also out there. But these are all free. And so here, I've included some links to some browser extensions if you feel like that's something you might be interested in. And so I'll again leave this on the screen for a moment so you can write that down. And then, like Stacy said, she's going to be sending out a follow-up email. And so these are something that could also be included in that if you don't have that handy. And also, again, this presentation will be recorded, so you can go back and look at that if you're interested in that.
So Tyler, if you use Privacy Badger, is it noticeable? Does it pop up little things saying Privacy Badger just noticed that something is trying to track you, or is it pretty seamless and behind the scenes?
It depends on which website you're at. And what's kind of cool about Privacy Badger too is it like learns over time. So the more you visit a website, the more it's aware of like third-party cookies on that website. The biggest change for me is that for a lot of like news sites or other places that I visit, Privacy Badger will like disable the comment section. So you can't read other people's comments on stuff as easily. And that's kind of the biggest change I've noticed. But besides that, let's see, I'll go to my screen again for a second and kind of show you how it looks. So let's see, we'll go back over here. Yeah, so Privacy Badger is this little thing in the corner up near the right-hand side. If you go to those three dots and then over, there's this little badger icon that has a 12. And so that is like which, that tells you how many things it's blocking, basically. And then you can open that and kind of disable it for a particular site or enable certain cookies if you want that functionality on a website. Like if you notice it's breaking a site, like if you're not able to use the site in the way that you want to, you can disable it and then enjoy it in the way you normally would. All right. So, all right, thanks for sticking with me. We're almost at the end.
Before you move on, there's a chat in Chrome.
Yeah, I see that.
Okay, I won't read it out.
All right, so in Chrome, do you know whether it is best to enable enhanced protection for safe browsing? It says it will send data to Google, or is it better to stick with standard protection? That is a good question. I am not familiar with like that particular setting. A lot of like since Chrome is owned by Google, it would send a lot of data to Google anyway, is my assumption. And one thing that people do as well, and I think we'll talk about this on a later slide, but you can do like incognito browsing or privacy browsing, as it's called, and some other things. And that kind of also prevents your session info from being shared with a lot of people. But that's a good question, and I'm not 100% sure.
Yeah, Judy, why don't you let me look into a little bit, and I'll include that in the follow-up email if I find anything that's useful.
Okay.
Does that sound good?
Yeah. Thanks, Stacy.
Yep. And the next chat.
Yeah, I see that too. Are you discouraging autofill for my bank, Amazon, etc.? Yeah, I personally don't use autofill for Amazon or my bank, but it's your choice if that's really convenient for you. You can do that if you want to. It's kind of up to you what information you feel comfortable sharing and what conveniences you want to give up. Is Bing better for browser? As far as I know, Bing is comparable to Safari in that it's a little bit better than Chrome. I don't think it's as good as Firefox. All right. So let's see where I'm at here. All right, yeah, VPNs. So this is another solution that's popular in certain circles online. VPNs are a software service that masks your IP address and encrypts your web traffic. So this can kind of prevent a lot of those location type services from tracking you. The downside to a VPN is that your data is all kind of going through this other entity. So that's another potential risk or just something to consider. The other downside to VPNs compared to browser extensions or plugins is a lot of VPNs are paid or subscription services. So that's another kind of thing to consider.
I think they also slow down access a bit, don't they?
VPNs, yeah, they definitely can. Again, because all your browsing information is going through this third entity. Okay, so here's a question from WG about autofill. Not necessarily. You can, when you log into a website, you can ask it to remember that you logged in, basically, and then you don't have to log in again. For me, when I think of autofill, I think more of like your shipping information from Amazon and stuff like that. But it is also kind of generally, I think for internet security purposes, a good idea to have your passwords written down somewhere in like a separate place just for your own interest. So that's a good security practice to keep in mind. But yeah, I still have my password enabled on a lot of websites where I don't have to log in then every time when I click on it. And so part of this, part of these measures, in terms of like your password security, this is actually a good thing that we're talking about on this slide here, two-factor authentication. And so that's what people might be familiar with in terms of this is like, you might get a text on your phone when you log into a service. That's kind of the most popular way that these are implemented. And so again, here's a website where you can do this for a lot of your banking or other services. And so, yeah, that's just a good way to make sure that then your passwords are protected. Nobody's misusing your information. And so two-factor authentication can be a very good idea. Corner case for that, just from my own personal experience, moving internationally is like really annoying for two-factor authentication because then your phone number changes and that's a big pain. So if you're changing your phone number or something and you're using two-factor authentication, you'll want to plan ahead a little bit more, just speaking from my own personal experience. All right. So the other kind of big picture thing to keep in mind here is advocacy solutions. So there's kind of some legislative proposals. Here in Europe, there's the General Data Protection Requirement, which requires companies and websites to explain more about how they collect, use, and share your data. So this is something that a lot of sites are then implementing now in a way that they weren't before, where you might see those privacy agreements that you have to agree to before you can actually go to the website. And then they break down their data usage in terms of those functional cookies. Some agreements might call them necessary cookies, and then kind of the statistical and analytical cookies and the targeting or personalization cookies. And so then if websites have those kind of agreements, it gives you more control over what kind of information you want to share. And again, there's kind of privacy watchdog organizations like the EFF that provide information and tools like Privacy Badger to encourage better corporate behavior online. So yeah, those places that make those kind of plugins, they do good work. All right, so that was a lot of information to throw at you in an hour. I'm sorry, but in terms of takeaways, just kind of big takeaways, there's a lot of different kinds of cookies. Not all of them are bad. The structural and functional ones are really useful for the types of websites that are out there in terms of making them work. The ones you want to be worried about more are the third-party cookies that track you across multiple websites and that then might turn around and sell your information to other companies or advertisers. And you don't have to have all the answers. A lot of browser extensions and software solutions exist to kind of do this work for you. And there's advocacy organizations that are on the front lines, keeping companies accountable and on their toes. All right. Yeah, exactly. I think, yeah, and like I said earlier, Google's kind of moving away from having third-party cookies on Chrome altogether, since they're using these things called flocks that are a little bit different. So that's kind of an experimental direction that they're going in, moving away from third-party cookies. But yeah, so third-party cookies are the ones you want to watch out for. So that's all I have. If anybody wants to stick around for some additional questions, I'll try to answer what I can. And Stacy can jump in and answer some stuff if you want. But thanks for listening. I hope it was informative for you. Thanks, Judy. All right, so let's stop the screen share so I can see people's faces. Yeah, what's your question? Yeah, so it depends. I think that's from the first link, potentially. And so I think when places talk about your unique fingerprint online, it means your kind of cookie profile that's built about you. So was that first link or was it the second one? Do you remember?
She says the first.
Okay, so I'm going to jump over there and look at that and see if I can answer that question for you.
They could be using that term in more than one way, so we'll see. Oh, she says no, the second.
Okay, the second. Okay, no worries.
We'll find what they mean by that term. It could be something.
Yeah, we'll look at it.
Or it could be, yeah.
Yeah, all right. So let's do fingerprint. So there's a link here to explain what they mean about fingerprinting. So let's look at that. Yeah, so they have some information on the side of this website that's kind of interesting, and it explains a little bit more about your results. All right, so then over here it has, yeah. Yeah, so it explains a little bit about like the bits, which is how it kind of builds your profile. So yeah. Yes, okay. So your fingerprint is saying how much identifying information is being shared. So down on this part of your results, if you scroll down the page a little bit, past where it says has that first table, then you can read a little bit more about fingerprinting. What is browser fingerprinting? Browser fingerprinting is a method of tracking web browsers by the configuration and setting information. Yeah, if it's something you're concerned about, I would definitely follow up on it.
So Judy, I'm poking around in Firefox while we're doing this, and I see two places that you might like to look if that's the browser that you use. At the upper right, there's like 3 horizontal lines to get to the menu. And I see a protections dashboard as well as preferences. Those are both places where you can control some of your privacy and security settings. So those are the places that I would recommend starting unless you wanted to just explore an extension like Tyler's mentioned, where it'll—
Yeah, exactly, because a lot of these extensions handle that work for you. And Firefox has good integration with all of these extensions, if that's something you're interested in.
It's interesting because I hadn't been to this protections dashboard before, and it tells me that Firefox blocked 4,500 trackers over the past week. So Firefox is already working on my behalf, but I could go in and tweak things as well.
Pretty cool. Yeah. Yeah, you can definitely jump pretty far down the rabbit hole. And in kind of designing this presentation, I didn't know a lot about online privacy before. And yeah, it's definitely, the more you read, the more scary information you can find out, for sure. But yeah, but like I said, you don't have to have all the answers. There's a lot of organizations that are out there that are helping to do the heavy lifting for you.
So any other questions from anybody? If you think of a question later, or if you start messing around and you can't quite figure out how to accomplish something, definitely feel free to contact the library and we'll see if we can walk you through that process or answer questions that you have. And like I said, I will send a follow-up email probably later today with some of this information, and just open up a line of communication so that you can let me know if you have questions that arise.
Yeah, thanks for listening, everybody. Thanks, Stacy, for having me.
Yeah, and Tyler will be with us again next week, I believe, if my calendar's right.
Yep.
He's going to lead a primer on digital minimalism a week from today, same time. So if you're interested, please sign up for that one on the library's website, and we'll go another step further into how to craft your online life in a satisfactory way.
Exactly. In a more intentional way.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So I'm gonna.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for coming. I'm gonna jump off because my wife has been managing our baby this whole time, and I'm gonna give her a little bit of a break. But thanks for listening. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good day.